Hi everyone, I'm really excited to host Shajay Bhooshan, Associate Director and Head of Computational Design at Zaha Hadid Architects. And this is a special interview for me because I have been following Sajay's work for a while, and seeing him from Indian background pushing the boundary in AC tech space like really inspires people like me to advocate for technology in AEC. So thanks a lot, Sajay, for inspiring us and putting your work out there so we can like learn more.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation, and quite keen to engage in conversation about topics that are close to our heart as Zadid Architects, and definitely close to me um, as an architect from like with a broad ranging set of interests. I'm a aspiring polymath. I have interest in design philosophy, design technologies, social impact, like economic aspects of architecture and the built environment and so on. So these kind of conversations are very important for me and like for us at Zadid Architects, because it gives us a sense of what the community is interested in, and also how we can collectively push things forward. Yeah.
Yeah, and for this session, we have some content in the form of presentation, and we want to keep it as conversational as possible. So if you're watching online, feel free to share your comments and questions in the chat. We'll try to address them. And before we move on to the technical presentation, Sajay, can you share what was your aha moment where you felt like blockchain or metaverse could be the next big thing?
Um, I think we've been interested in the idea of like a online community formation, and then transforming that to on land, physicalize it or physically manifest it. Since the time I went to the design research lab at the AA in London, where there was this seminal project called Negotiate My Boundary, and it was a team project of five people, and one of them went on to become a director at her name is Manuela Gato, and the other one was my tutor when I did my master's at the Design Research Lab. His name was Vasilis, and at that time they were already using VRML, like Flash and like all of these things, and like made a working prototype of a hypothetical prototype of like online community building, and then how to use modern day technologies to physically realize this. Like, so since then, like, I've been very much curious about this kind of long-term value creation, the idea of using technology, and have like a lighthouse and a vision and a thesis. So since my time, like I've been trying to build up like the key components of making that vision a reality, right? Like, so you need creative capital, you need technical capital to make it happen. So I would say my aha moment was when I came to London, and then again recently, of course, the pandemic accelerated some of these technologies. Blockchain had a resurgence after the first wave of like kind of scams and like whatnot. Um, and also Unreal technology, game technologies evolved so much, like that you can play games on mobile phones, and like that, PUBG, like games like which have like a global reach of like 500 million players every month. Like that's to me super exciting, and I always want to be where the next generation is at, right? That, and because there's no point being anywhere else. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. Um, I think now we can like talk about the presentation.
Yeah, sure. And yeah, like I would just, it's not a detailed presentation. I mean, I do have like a full length presentation with like messages and so on, but like I will present like the first 15 minutes and then take pause and, like, if there are questions, or and I will go through the rest of the presentation in chunks, based on the questions or based on the conversation and how things emerge from there. Um,
Mhm.
okay, so largely I will talk about like the metaverse and Web 3.0 and how it relates to more serious applications in the real world, and serious architectural and urban um, uh, applications, both online and on land. And um, so, are you seeing my screen, Mayur?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, so I want to make draw the parallel between designing and architecting the metaverse and like the realities of designing and architecting real cities and real buildings, right? And what are the realities? Like there is a convergence and there's lots of shared features like spatial design wise and also governance of the built environment or the spatial environment, both in online architecture and urbanism, and both and also on online architecture and urbanism. So that's the big context that I think like the conversation can be centered around, the kind of congeniality between architecting the metaverse and architecting real cities. And take for a moment, like let's look back at like how cities in the 20th century have uh, evolved, like particularly in the US and also China and India and so on. Like most of the 20th century cities are something like this, sprawled cities. They're more geared towards building roads and infrastructure, and very low density, automobile friendly, but not very human friendly. And on top of it, like it's made like dense cities like Barcelona like fall out of favor. People think that this is retrograde and this is like actually backwards, old city, decaying city. And like so that's what 20th century architecture urbanism really did. And but the reality is like cities like Atlanta, which are low density and sprawl cities, consume an order of magnitude more resources, like, and they're definitely not sustainable in any way. Like so you can see here comparison between Atlanta and Barcelona, same population, order of more magnitude carbon footprint. um, I mean, it's obvious to, I mean, it's very easy to think why that is. Like heating is going to cost more because there are no shared walls. You have to commute to places of work, and it leads to loneliness, that you don't know your neighbors, like. And so per capita infrastructure costs are extraordinary, mental health costs are extraordinary, and walkable cities are known to be better health wise for its inhabitants, and so on and so on. So sprawl consumes more resources, and nobody has like articulated this much better than Jane Jacobs in mid-century America. The idea that this kind of modernism runs very, very deep. Like it is entrenched in all the course curricula of the architecture and city planning courses and institutions. It is entrenched in federal and state legislation that affects housing, that affects mortgage financing, that affects urban renewal policies, that affects zoning policies, like all kinds of deep running. It's thinking of cities as though they're like automobiles, like, and not thinking of them as a place for human habitation. So humans, so cities are not generally designed for humans. And so, and this obviously then leads to buildings becoming unloved and like routinely being demolished. Like, and so first of all, they're made in a very carbon inefficient way, like, and polluting way. And then when you demolish it, like, you cause even more pollution, because uh, demolition of buildings actually contributes to like close to 40% of carbon emissions of the built environment. So this is a huge problem ecologically, socially, that architect are, buildings are not considered for human habitation. And so that's a broad thesis, like why we are interested in the metaverse and Web 3.0 is to enable nurture communities and consensus in cyberspace, so that in anticipation of a sustainable physical realization. So we want to see moving forward like that, like architecture is going to be always hybrid mixed reality, like there's always going to be an online component and a offline online component, and one can be used to inform the other. And so we can think of on land as like online plus plus, like as in like so, or in a way we can think of online as like a simulation realm, simulate consensus, simulate experience, simulate partial economies. And then, but the real world is of course much more messy. There's physics to be considered, there's like legislation and many other things to be considered, like social aspects, game theory aspects. So we can think of it as like a sim to real situation. So it's a sandbox, like we see Metaverse and Web 3.0 as enabling a sandbox on steroids, as Tubador of Metaverse said. And also Metaverse and Web 3.0 is a natural home of computation, as Philip Morel said. And so that's our main interest, online to online, nurturing communities and consensus. Like we want people to not to be forced into things. So cities should not just happen to people, like people should participate in its creation in one way or the other. So we are thinking about participatory urban development, like, and how we can return to the high density, pedestrian friendly, vibrant, sustainable cities, similar to the ideas proposed of the City Beautiful by Jane Jacobs and also others in mid-century America, like and or like transforming low-density cities like Calgary, where I'm currently at, like, or uh, other or Houston, which, for example, in the U.S., like, which is mostly parking lot and barely any city, and how you can transform these into higher dense pedestrian Barcelona-like buildings, cities. And so this is where we are excited about, like, people like Balaji and Vitalik Buterin from the new blockchain space, like the Web 3.0 space, like even A16Z, thinking about building communities cloud first and land last. And also, more importantly, the idea that, like, the minimum necessary technology stack is already here. You just need to combine it. So there's no new technologies. Fundamental technologies are already there, and we just need to adapt it and extend it for architectural purposes, and bring our own interests, and bring our own expertise, and bring our own architectural tech stacks into the mix, and really engage in a conversation with this phenomenal energy and enthusiasm in the space of the metaverse and Web 3.0, and how we can channel some of that into, like, affecting real world cities, either existing cities or new ones that, like, that are being built, that are considered. And it doesn't need to be full on cities. It can be small neighborhoods, any kind of urban transformation. And so, like, the technologies that we need to put together, of course, like, as I said, like, the main stack is, like, related to spatial technologies, things like the metaverse and virtual platforms, related to spatial environments. And the other is, of course, in real world, on, like, these ideas of charter city as the most fully fleshed out idea, that, like, you can experiment and create a special jurisdiction, um, that to create new environments like Singapore or Hong Kong or Shenzhen or Dubai, like that, like, really pull people out of poverty and their labor markets and so on. So, and but most importantly, these are sandboxes in the real world to experiment on governance, experiment with new technology, experiment with um, uh, new modes of participatory development. So, and charter cities is the most fully fleshed out idea, but, like, of course, you can don't need to go all the way to charter cities, but you can start with the neighborhood, or like a kind of participatory urban regeneration project. Like, and there's lots of these both in the US and in Europe. Like, the idea of crowd funded residential development is really picking up. steam. So you could think of charter cities as like a kind of super souped up homeowners association on steroids, right? That it's like really scaled up version of that, and how residential developments and can be scaled uh, through crowd funding and also crowd participation. So these two online. So on the online side, there are spatial technologies related to metaverse, and on land there is like these governance possibilities, and also building these charter cities. Like you can experiment with new manufacturing technologies like 3D printing, or So that's the background that I want to set for this conversation, and the rest of the presentation covers details about these, which I can pick up as we go. So, so how do we back this long-term vision with creative and technical capital? We at Zaha Hadid Architects have been interested in this vision, as I said, at least for the last 20 years uh, since since I mentioned this Negotiate My Boundary project, which Patrick Schumacher, who's the principal at Zaha Hadid Architects now, and the kind of creative wellspring of Zaha Hadid Architects, also contributed to that project. He was the advisor, and he wrote like seminal text called Autopoiesis of Residential Communities. So how do we back this kind of vision of a collaborative, progressive architecture and urbanism with, and how do we make it happen? Like, so we've been in the last few years, like last 2.5 years, involved in two projects. One online, which is this Cyber Lieberland, which is an attempt to create a small metaverse district, or like a sub metaverse, to virtually host the citizens of the world's first micronation. And they already have a blockchain-based governance. They have a blockchain-based constitution, like, and they already interact and have conversations. And so we want to provide a spatial environment in which they can virtually conduct their administrative business, and like and also maybe engage in the public sphere, like have conversations, like events and so on, virtually, rather than just do it through Discord and Zoom. Why not do it in a game like environment where it's a spatial environment with spatial audio and so on? So that's what we've been trying to flesh out, the idea of a virtual cyber Lieberland that will go hand in hand with their already on-chain democracy and on-chain economy. And the other one, which is on land, like which is we are very much equally excited by, like, and this is we've been involved much longer, already 3.5 years, starting from the first conversation, and the first 10 houses will be completed in this year, or early next year. It's a attempt to build a charter city in Roatan in Honduras, and it is also an attempt to like provide and engage with the local communities and provide labor markets and employment and upskill um, uh, um, the society there, and also how we can strategically inject technologies, etc. And so these two projects, one online and one on land, is another focal point of the conversation. And we've been, and alongside, we also been doing these kind of short-term quick sketches and studies and collaborations, like this virtual gallery for NFTs for Kenny Schachter called NFTism, where we worked with Journey. And so again, like just to dabble into new technologies from a project perspective, rather than like kind of speculate on it, like in a sandbox. Like, why don't we just actually get on there and do some actual projects and learn from that? Like, so this was like a short 1 month exercise between Kenny Schachter, who was a gallerist, and he owns a bunch of NFTs, and he talks a lot of about the new online art, like seeing like how NFTs are like really transforming the amount of experimentation in the art scene, which is similar to DeFi, like, which has transformed the amount of experimentation in the financial realms, and so on. and then Journey took our 3D designs and like added the game component, which is to say, like, people can navigate and have conversation with each other and so on. So, and then we're also doing something similar for with PUBG or PlayerUnknown Battleground. We are creating an in-game space where games people can have a social kind of game of like paintball shooting, like, or the virtual equivalent of that, which is called Battle Royale, style of like first-person shooter game where you're kind of basically have to defeat the other team. So these are our like kind of general project-based experiences, like where we are learning about the technology requirements, constraints, and how to make things work on a mobile phone, how to make things work on the browser, how to design the 3D assets, like, and we are learning a lot that, are the way we design our real world buildings, like which you see in the background, and the technology stack that we use is highly compatible with the metaverse, like, and that's also something that I can talk about later. Um, and as I said, like, we've been interested in online community creation for at least 20 years. So this project was called the RAM TV Negotiate My Boundary. So they prototyped this kind of tool using VRML and Flash. And then they also suggested that, like, it can be created using these kind of industrial construction technologies. And you have to think, like, this is well before Facebook, well before even internet was like anywhere near mobile friendly, etc. Um, so there was we've been excited about this idea, and Patrick wrote like the foreword for this book, and me and my partner Alicia, like, since 2015, we realized that, like, these ideas can be revisited because the technology for to make this happen is increasingly and rapidly evolving. What are the technologies? Gaming technologies, metaverse technologies, and also on-land technologies of digital fabrication, robotic fabrication, and highly mass customizable technologies, right then. So we started creatively exploring this with our students at the Design Research Lab since 2015, and various forms of application. This is just one team. So in the 5 years, um, we have had like 5 times 3 teams at least, so 15 to 18 teams looking at this. In so maybe I will take pause here, and I would like to say, like, the two main components that we want to talk about, or we excites us, is the idea of the spatial technologies on the one hand and governance technologies on the other. So you can think of the left as being having a lot of alignment with the metaverse side, and the right as having a lot of alignment with Web 3.0. Um, is that a good time, a good place to take a pause, Mayur?
Yeah, sure. I think
Mm.
like I must admit, like amazing presentation and the projects you have been developing. So I wanted to ask few questions on the clarifications of metaverse. So there are like
Mhm,
four categories I see metaverse platforms which are being developed right now. Like there are like low resolution voxelized metaverses like crypto
mhm,
voxel sandbox. One is high resolution on somnium space. Also there is like
mhm,
centralized version of Facebook's metaverse, decentralized
mhm,
blockchain based metaverse. So how
mhm.
do you see falling like integrating this online community part?
Yeah, so we believe, like, I mean, we are particularly interested in the kind of Unity based, or like, we are interested in Unreal based and Unity based and game engine based type of metaverses, like, which are more open, to the extent that, like, these game engines are free, right? And anybody can fork it and develop their own version. And another reason we are interested in it is because it's very high fidelity, and this high fidelity is very important to have serious applications, like, and to be able to help onboard people about our real world cities, like get them excited, get them on, educate them, like, about like the deep impacts that real cities have on their lives. Like, we need this realism, like, and so we're definitely interested in the open version, like, whether it is decentralized, like in terms of the compute networks, like, uh, or not. Like, we're definitely interested in the openness of, participation, that like the community should be involved in creating um, these spaces, and like, so in that sense they learn something about the real world as well. So something like SimCity, but something like Skyline Cities, etc., but for real, with higher fidelity. And also it has parallels with Second Life, like, and again, if you look back at Second Life and why it did not really succeed so much, like, um its design wasn't considered in an architectural or urban way. Like, it was a bit loose, and it didn't have like that, which we believe, like, if metaverses have to be successful, they need um, to think about like the spatial experiences aspect, and how real cities are laid out, like, like, so 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 that's the metaverse side that we were most interested in, because we see most congeniality, most alignment with this high fidelity game technology based metaverses. And I mean, of course, we're intellectually interested in what Facebook is doing, what Microsoft is doing with Teams, and like, the idea of virtual work, like, that's also interesting, because it's something that is a serious application, right? Like that. So it's not just, um, spending time in an exploratory way. That it has to function, it has to improve, it has to have practical application in our everyday life. So that's what's interesting about Facebook's attempts, or make Microsoft's attempts. And also there's the digital twin aspects of like things that NVIDIA is trying to do with Omniverse and so on. Like, so yeah, so we are aligned with various aspects of each one of these attempts. Like, but significantly, we're interested in um, a bi-directional relationship between online architecture and urbanism and the real world cities. Yeah. And any technology that enables that is where we will be most attracted to. Yeah.
Got it. And I I see like it there are like few things which architects, if they bring their own skill set into the metaverse,
Mhm.
like there could be some placemaking or abstract skills which would be beneficial for the metaverse. But also if we have like very physical, like land based approach to metaverse, we might not be able to leverage few of the flexibilities this metaverse provides. So what are some skills or approach you think would be beneficial from architectural background, and like would, and also some hindrance?
Yeah, that's a good question, or a concern, right? Like, we've heard this like a fair few times. Like, and also looking at the online thing is, why are we designing cities in the same metaverses in the same way real cities are designed? Um, I think like the problem there is not that we are designing metaverses in the same way we design cities. We are just using the wrong examples of cities, right? Like, we're taking like cities that don't really work in the real world, like, and trying to replicate them in the metaverse. Like, um, so maybe this is a good point to take a look, talk a little bit about spatial technology, what we mean by that, like, and or what I mean by that, like, and I particularly see both by work we're doing at Zadid Architect, but also externally, in the research community. There's a definite convergence of architectural technologies, computer graphics, and game tech, and which we are calling spatial tech for this presentation. And this has a long history, almost as much as a history as the BIM side of things. BIM definitely doesn't follow this convergence. Uh, so like around 1960s, 65, 60, 70, the BIM model, Chuck Eastman kind of started the idea of BIM, and along at the same time, Pixar, the founders of Pixar, Catmull. So there was this parallel trend like of computer-aided geometry design, computational geometry, computer graphics, that evolved. And so increasingly we are seeing these aspects being picked up and aligned with architectural requirements. So some of the underlying mathematics, some of the underlying graphic technologies have been adapted and extended, and like new territories have been discovered by seminal people, contributors like Helmut Pottman, who's a mathematician, and also research groups where I'm doing a PhD, for example, like Block Research Group, or Carnegie Mellon, EPFL, TU Vienna, and so on and so on. There's this is a rapidly expanding, extremely scientific, and hugely fun, exciting field where computer graphics technologies are combining with structural geometry, structural engineering ideas, and so on. So, and they're creating this architectural discipline of so-called architectural geometry, which is combines structural awareness and manufacturing or fabrication awareness. Um, and and there's also like already some of the complex buildings are using this technology in a practical way for rationalizing facades or developing construction information. And both these examples are not like from Zaha, but like one is from Evolut, which is Helmut Pottman's company, and then Proving Ground, which is a US-based startup or company that like takes complex geometries and provides BIM services. Right. So this kind of thinking is already making its way into architectural technology stack, and providing real alternatives to the idea of BIM and Revit, which is neither compatible with design nor with like robotic fabrication or digital manufacturing. The current tech stack related to BIM is good at is like production of drawings, right? And that future, it doesn't really excite us so much. So we are taking this second like path, which has an equally deep history, which we are saying is a convergence of architectural, structural engineering, computer graphics, and computational geometry technologies. Um, and so what are the shared features like between these disciplines, or particularly between architecture, computer graphics, and games, or CG movies, and games? So for one, CG movies, games are tech-enabled production of culture. So what do I mean by that? Like the left side of this image is just as important as the right side. So it's technology. So the several PhDs worth of simulation technology goes into the simulation of the fur, the simulation of lighting, simulation of snow, simulation of character rigging, and all kinds of things. But on the left is like color schemes, like what the expressions of the characters, storytelling aspects, dramaturgical aspects, narrative aspects. And so this is going to be always the case with games, movies, and architecture. I would contest that it's not like click a button and you get a product, which is what happened with post-war production of housing in the UK, for example. They just cookie cutter built like hundreds of houses, and within 10 years realized that like none of this, people don't like it because like the left side of the image, left side of the conversation was left out, which is the narrative aspect, the social aspects, and so on. And this is also historically true in architecture, that architecture is tech enabled cultural production, and it's not just the engineered tech product that like you can just massively deploy. So you can make technology, you can make tools, that a architect or a user has to use and create options and explore. So again, so like buildings like the Gaudi, sticking to the Barcelona analogy, the Sagrada Familia, like it's pre-computer technology, but it was like a lot of mathematical and instrument making, geometry technologies that went into the design the of his buildings, and also went into the design of Barcelona, many of the buildings in Barcelona, and and we cannot deny the existence of narrative here, right? Like that's what makes it aligned with human use, human occupation, and so on. So this is a huge uh, shared feature between games, between metaverse, between architecture, that there is always going to be a dramaturgical aspect, like dramaturgy meaning how do you design spatial environments that can host human activity. Like so, like for example, in this, the human activity is prayer, or like some kind of meditation or solemnness, and so there is that aspect to this church, right? That there's a dramaturgical aspect and there's a narrative aspect, and um, and so that's always going to be the case. And another thing that is increasingly common between all these disciplines is the software stack itself. The idea of digital content creation for games and architecture, like we are using literally the same software stack like Maya and mesh-based processing, polygon modeling, texture packing, that is used in games and movies. We are just designing stadiums and buildings, right? Like that. And there is a reason why we chose this tool set, like because as you notice, like at the bottom there is a timeline because it makes architecture immediately time-based, and it also has a lot of designer compatibility and intuitive, like it's highly intuitive workflows and like so on. So it's easy to focus on the expressive aspects and not worry about like uh, too much of the technical. And um, and the other thing, this like architecture and metaverse and games and movies share is this phenomena of 99% and 1%, i.e. the Pareto distribution. For example, in the UK, 99% of AEC companies, architecture engineering companies, are small medium businesses, and they're responsible for 60% of annual revenue in the UK. And it's similar in games, like 96% of indie games are responsible for 30% of revenue. So there's this extreme skew, right? Like so 1% of architecture companies are responsible for 40% of the revenue, and 1% of AAA games take about 70% of the revenue. So that's um, what that says is that both sides are important. Like, and this proportion may vary. Like, it can be 90-10 or 80-20, but like that there is this bi-directional relationship between like large companies and like the small medium businesses. So this is a phenomena that is shared by architecture, game, movies, and perhaps even in music and other cultural professions and disciplines. And related to that is what makes some of this expensive is the idea that professionally generated content becomes expensive. Why? Because lots and lots of research and investment and of human hours has to go into designing these buildings and spaces. So not all companies and not all can afford to do that. And um, and the other reason, yeah, so we've been doing research into tensile fabrication and the corresponding geometries, or hot wire cutting and the corresponding geometries, how to design for robotic hot wire cutting, how to design for tensile geometry, tensile manufacturing or fabric structures, how to design for metallic folding or origami structures, how to use metal bending, how to use 3D printing, and all of this. There's significant investment of time and monetary resources to develop design expertise by engaging with like these new technologies. And this is also true in gaming world, like any game, like gaming house, like they have a relatively large R&D team, like that will explore new technologies and make the games better, faster, and so on. And the other shared feature is that like professionally generated content is very time intensive. And what that means is that like every new building costs the same amount of time and as to build as the previous one, if not more. So unlike in software where like the marginal costs are very low, like the next product is easy to make, like because you already built the framework. And so this again, it's also true in games. Like every game costs the same amount of human resource, if not more than the previous one. Um, so what that generally leads to, on the other hand, is benefits. We get high performance, like so we get aesthetic high performance, we get material conservation, we can get like highly fine-tuned geometries where, like for example, this 3D concrete printed bridge that we developed, where we research what we can learn from historic masonry structures, how we can combine modern technologies of robotic concrete printing to save on material. Like as you can notice, it's predominantly hollow, and there is no glue, there is no steel, or there's very little steel, and it's all dry assembled. And so all of this means that like we can reduce the total amount of material, we can easily reuse concrete, and we reuse the steel because we can like easily dismantle it and crush it and so on, or even replace some of the broke if some blocks had to be replaced, we can temporarily support it and replace it. And so we can recycle, we can repair, like so these are some of the benefits of professionally generated content, because we can discover new things or push boundaries. And 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 then if you take the same kind of principles and apply it to building components, not just a demonstrated bridge. For example, Block Research Group is doing this already in taking these ideas of historic masonry structures, which reduce the total amount of steel by 90% and the total amount of concrete by 70% in every floor slab. And floor slabs occupy 40% of the building mass, so you can do the math of how ecological benefits of like this kind of high performance architecture. Uh, and also there's benefits high performance in terms of user experience and make having a lot more interaction and so on. So for example, our gallery for mathematics, like which we redesigned, like it is a small gallery, but like in the first year of its opening already attracted 1 million visitors, where previously the dwell time in the gallery was about 30 seconds. We increased it to 2.5 minutes. So there's definitive user experience benefits, higher fall, like so all of this translates to genuine benefits uh, to um, uh, or appropriate use of resources, right? So there are user social benefits, user engagement benefits, and there's also ecological benefits of professionally generated content. But it is expensive and it is time intensive, and that's where we need to think of like how some of these can be democratized and how we can have user generated content, like similar to Instagram filters, TikTok, YouTube. All of these were originally like highly professional content creation, like in Adobe After Effects and so on, which still continues. But that maybe is like 10% or 5% of like the entire. amount of videos produced, right? Like users now, there's ready amount of technologies which have democratized video content creation, and so we believe the metaverse can be a vehicle to democratize architectural content creation and to translate all of these professional grade expertise downstream to a wider audience. So what we are trying to do is, create the ideas of easy CAD, both encode and distribute like all the knowledge that like we at the professional end are generating and creating into these kind of ready atlas of forms, and also design spatial design presets and also adaptive modules, and the modules. So there's a combinatory logic to the modules, but at the same time, each of the modules can be created using a rule-based procedure, like step-by-step creation. So which means it is compatible with encoding it into APIs or encoding it into uh, 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 just computer code, and it's also very compatible with like gaming engines and so on. And so yeah, maybe that would stop there. Like so those are some of the opportunities of combining uh, the technology stack from architecture with the technology stack from the gaming and the metaverse side, and some of the um, so the criticisms we can or some of the pitfalls we can discuss later. But let's say for now we can focus on what are the synergies, what are the advantages. The gaming content creation stack is similar. The idea of like professionally created content versus user generated content, how to have a good mix of both, and how they can be a good flow between user generated content informing professional content and the other way around, etc. So yeah, so these are some things that we see the metaverse can really democratize um, uh, some of the professional innovations that are for now only being done by like a small set of uh, universities or a small set of architectural practices or engineering practices, and a bit like Grasshopper democratized like computational design, like maybe the metaverse might democratize like a whole new set of content creation.
Yeah. So like I could imagine now like architects have a important role of encoding institutional knowledge and give it out in the form of like presets, like how in Adobe After Effects there are professional presets where that's a good starting point to make the content to the next level. So
Hmm.
before we move on to the government tech, I'm curious to know, so a lot of this metaverses are like empty most of the time, and there is like
Hmm.
uh, a lack of strategy to re-engage and make them users come back to the same asset. So what are some
Hmm.
criterias or things you keep in mind while developing these assets in the metaverse to keep long-term user engagement?
Yeah, that's a great question and concern. Like, so current metaverses are, yeah, for the most part empty, and they don't fully engage with in my opinion, like the 3D spatial aspects. They're kind of like 2D plus plus, right? Like they like 2.5D type of, like, as you can see here, like there are these screens like that are flat and like, like just like a website rotated in perspective kind of feel to it. Like, and and that's because like, in comparison to this, like, what our architectural training, our spatial training can bring is the idea of at just talking about and representing users and user experience, right? Like, so how can you represent user experience in your 3D model that is the first thing that we do, right? Like as architects, like we are always rotating the camera around and moving some vertices here and some making adjustments. Like, so we are putting on the uh, head the looking at the space from the eyes of the user. Like, what is the spatial experience like? Even when we are drawing a plan, that's what we are doing, right? Like, we're like thinking, oh, here's reception, here's like, so we are thinking about user journeys, we are thinking about um, what they see, and is it easy to navigate? Like, is it easy? If I come from my entrance, how can I get to where I need to get to? And these are things that good architects should think about, and they do think about. And so when we design these 3D spaces, like virtual spaces, we bring that kind of thinking, and we also bring like the associated technology or tools that help us visualize navigation, help us visualize, like, like in a stadium seating, like we literally put a camera in every seat and see what every person sees. And there's even a measure for it, like called the A value or like whatever. And so you can do this like in the metaverse too, like you just, which is what we do. We just generate a sequence of images like on a path and see how how much of things do they see, like and is the space navigable, is it easy to get to where they need to, or is it all crowded out, like is it all dark and like messy. So those are things that we think about, like, and we also think about how current metaverses like can be enhanced, like by thinking about the user, like what are the things that the user wants to do, they want to explore. Maybe they want to have, of course, they want to have their avatars, but they want to maybe build things, like, and invite, like Fortnite creator, they want to build their own thing and invite their friends. They maybe want to do some transactions, but they maybe want to socialize. So just thinking about the user and what the kinds of things they want to do, and then bringing our architectural experience and expertise to address these concerns and these user oriented performance, like, so just thinking about what problems are worth solving from a user perspective, and then just bringing our expertise to do that. And so, for example, like, why don't we allow why don't we create tools like people can visualize how their spaces are going to look like. So this is where I was saying high fidelity is a very important thing, because it just, for non-experts, the less abstract the better, right? Like, this relates, this is more resonant with like non-expert users. And and so what does spatial technologies need to do in the metaverse? What is their performance? So they just need to enhance user experience. And how do they enhance user experience? Like, make sure that like there are more interactions with people, like, so you can design your navigation in a way, the same way in airports, people design the duty free so that you're forced to go to the duty free, and like there's no straight path to straight to your gate, you have to meander through the duty free. So you can do things like that. And also, if you have noticed, like the duty free is usually like the floor is a bit rougher, so you have to literally go slower, and so on, right? Like, so there are these ways to think about how to make navigation and spaces interaction rich, like how. And the other thing we think about, how, what is the depth of view? Like, it's not about just room after room after room. How many rooms can you see from any given location, for example? And and we also think about dramaturgy, right? Like, how, if what is the activity that is going on, and how can we design the space to maximize that activity? Like, let's say it's a conference. That's where I was saying about the church. It's not only a structure, it's also Gaudi had to think about that that space, like, oh, this is a meditation space, it's a religious space, like, so let's make the ceiling super tall and have the light come in from the top, like, and so these are all dramaturgical aspects. um, and of course you have to meet some polygon budgets and computational constraints, like it has to run on the phone and like so on. So those are like technical criteria that we also have to consider. And then we output assets, 3D geometries that are compatible with the game pipeline, whether it is Unity based or Unreal based, so that it can then be taken, and you can add the massively multiplayer components and audiovisual communication components. um, yeah, so I would say social performance and technical performance are things that we think about, so that we don't end up with like dead spaces.
Yeah. And lastly, so for example, one could create a standalone Unity or Unreal game where people can socialize and show high fidelity objects. What are like some blockchain enabled things which one couldn't do before, or like some Web3 integrated with Metaverse, which makes this different?
Yeah, Web3. I think like we can talk about Web3. So that's where like GovTech. What are things you can do with Web3 or blockchain? Two main things you can do is related to ID. One is identity, right? Like you especially if you use like zero knowledge proof technologies like Algorand, like, or it's highly secure, like it's even your public key can be not tracked back to your user ID. Um, so uh, so your assets, so once your identity is secure, like your assets can be secured to you, your property rights can be secured to you, and like your followers, your network can be secured to you, like you can take it anywhere from one metaverse to another, you can take it offline, you can store it in your hardware wallet, like all of these things, like um, so all of these applications related to identity and individuate identity, meaning individuation, right? Like, so you own your data type of, so security aspects, things that you can do. And that's what GovTech needs to do. One of the things that it needs to do, whether online or on land, is represent the user, right? Like, whether it's 5 users or 10 users or hundreds of users, you have to represent that user, and that user needs to have an ID, and we need to keep track of what are the assets they own, and they need to be securely keep and kept track of. And games already do this to the extent that they're centralized. So for example, if you're a Fortnite player or PUBG player, like in the games, keep track of how many assets you own, like what in-game tokens you purchased, and who your friends are, and like all of these things. It just happens to be centrally uh, stored, and so they can kick you off like that network anytime they want. um, and so yeah, so that's something that like GovTech needs to do, is secure assets, rights, and networks related to individuals. And the second thing that it needs to do or can do is enable consensus, which I think is something that truly is remarkable or interesting aspect about blockchains, is to me at least, is not the cryptocurrency part, it is the consensus mechanisms. Like, magically hundreds of computers around the world can agree on something, and the same algorithms can be extended to or adapted to develop like community consensus, like um, and that's what's really interesting for us. Like, there is a game theoretical aspect related to consensus. Like, how do you don't have to force anybody to arrive at to follow something. You can incentivize it, like through tokens or through fame or through like whatever, right? Like, so there's incentive design, there's voluntary participation, there's consensus, there is secure assets, rights, and networks. So that's what blockchains can do. or that's the aspect of blockchains, or that's the aspect of Web 3.0 that we are most excited by, or at least I'm most excited by. And the cryptocurrency part, like, is like, I have to admit I don't know much about it, like, and because it doesn't really interest me as much, insofar as I think of Metaverse and Web 3.0 as not like as a get rich quick scheme, right? It's more something long-term value creation that's really interesting. So for example, we created this interface game-like thing for our for the housing project in Prospera. So this is based in Unreal. So users can log in and they can click on these voxels. They can customize their house. Each of these modules are assets uh, that they can pay for, or they can own, or then they can eventually be able to share or trade with their neighbors, etc. And again, here there's also user experience aspects, so they can navigate. It's trying to be as photoreal as possible, so they can see what the view from their house is like. Is the neighbor gonna block their view? And and so on and so on. So we're trying to get it as photoreal as possible. Of course, this is in 1.0. So all of these assets can be tracked to the user, right? Like, so they can every voxel is registered to the user, so they can pay for it, and what they want to do with the voxel is also stored in the property registry. So they can say, I own this voxel, I won't build anything, and neither can anybody else. Or they can say they can buy this voxel and they will build something, or they will say, I can buy this voxel and nobody will obstruct. They will always maintain 20% view through. So we can execute these kind of things through smart contracts and so on. So auto executing rule-based property rights. And so what we did, the other thing that we did, the consensus side. Um, so each individual user chose their pixels and wanted to buy, let's say, these 3 voxels or 6 voxels or 2 voxels, etc. And you can notice here, because each individual user can choose whatever they want, like, there's conflicts. Like, everybody picked the bookends and nobody wanted the ones in the middle, nobody wanted the ones on the side, because obviously the views were rubbish. And also, when you pick the bookends, you don't have to pay for the viewing rights. And so it was kind of gamified that way, right? So it was kind of clear that there are these conflicts. So, and how can we negotiate this? How can we resolve the conflict in a rule-based way, in a positive sum way? Like, how? So in this particular instance, like, we took on the left, like, all the round one configurations. So every color is an individual user and their preference, and we decomposed it and recomposed it, such that, like, most of the users, like, got what they wanted. So initially, on the top was the original configuration, and on the bottom was our kind of algorithmically reconfigured stack, where there was 88% bookend units compared to the original 66%, right? Like, but we could have also flipped this. We could have made it like more competitive game. We say, okay, now bid for it. So if there is conflict, like, okay, we can make the price of these voxels much higher and the price of the voxels in the middle much lower, so we can incentivize people to pick the units in the middle. So there are many things that you could do using these consensus algorithms to resolve these kind of conflicting choices that individual players may make. So that's one thing that we're genuinely excited by in the blockchain space, is the consensus algorithm themselves, like, whether it's the binary Byzantine, or, like, how, or the game theoretic incentives, also very much of interest. How can we create a value map so that, like, people auto negotiate, like, and how can we create a win-win situation, a positive sum game, rather than somebody winning and the others losing, etc. So I would say, like, these 3 aspects is what, like, genuinely interests us about the blockchain or Web 3.0, is secure assets, rights, and networks, meaning your social network, consensus aspects, um, and also voluntary participation, that you don't have to force anybody. Like you can think about incentives, and also, what's interesting. There's a caveat. Like you can get the incentive design completely wrong, and incentives might become misaligned. Like we discovered in the bookend situation, we didn't know this is going to happen. So it just happened that like every book picked the bookend. So then we had to redesign the incentive mechanism and so on. Yeah.
So, do you foresee that metaverse is gonna help more and more to materialize those designs with those blockchain-based concessions and like more participatory, and maybe as you showed in the Unreal game project where people are curating their own design and houses, so it's lesser professionally generated content, more user-generated content.
Mhm. Well, actually, it's a mix, right? It's not because we created the building components, like, and they can choose like some presets, and also parametrically modify some, like the size of the balcony or like things like that, in this version. Yeah, so there will always be a mix of professionally generated content, assets, like, and which will lead to users being able to customize things. Yeah, it's like the TikTok analogy is like, I think is good, because bulk of the presets and like the technology has been developed by like looking at by professional content creators, or videographers or video artists, and then they make it available. And what's interesting is like then all this, through these mashups and so on, like genuinely new things emerge, like, and which has nothing to do with the original design. But we are not there yet. Like, I mean, this is just step one for our configurator. Like, it's just a pilot project. But yeah, eventually we do see getting there. Like we do think like, once these 10 houses are completed, we can, we will definitely do like much larger communities. Yeah.
Yeah. I was just
Yeah.
thinking like in TikTok or Insta Reels, like people make remix video or reaction
Mhm.
video on like YouTube, like so it's meta of meta. So how would a user generated content like in 3D spatial aspect of metaverse like on meta level look like?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, but like I think one thing is going to be, you will, I think like one way I think about this is that like you will publish a specification that it has to sit within certain voxels, right? Like, so you will specify interface conditions, and users can do whatever they want after that. Like, some of this kind of happens in the kind of Decentraland builder. It kind of happens in the Fortnite creator and so on, right? Like, so you specify the interface rules, like, and as long as it meets those criteria, you can do whatever, right? And of course, then you uh, in phase one or early phases, there may be content moderation, just so there's some performance criteria are optimized, or people don't just arbitrarily put things that don't make any structural sense, like stuff like that. But yeah, like, so I think like that's really interesting in the architectural sense, is that like you as a user, your choice affects the neighbor. Whereas on TikTok, that really doesn't matter, right? Like your creation is your content. Whereas like what's really interesting in the architectural sense is that one building affects the neighbor, right? So there's positive and negative externalities like that, which really boils down to, how can you consider structural rules, which we had to do even in this particular project. We For ourselves, like we made rules that like the cantilever cannot be more than 3 pixels wide, or like 2.5 pixels long. So we set these rules, which will keep the game in sensible territory. um, and also people can choose any voxel, like even the initially, as you saw in the video, people started choosing voxels that are hanging in the sky. So then you penalize that and say, okay, now you have to build up the structure, you have to cost, you have to pay for all the structure that's going to hold up your building up in the sky. And whereas if you choose the pixels on top of somebody else's pixels, then you pay some of your, you pay them a fee, right? Like, so these are kinds of things that we think can happen, which is novel and unique to architectural design or spatial design, where your user content has to think about externalities, whereas in TikTok it really doesn't, because it's encapsulated. Um, and also, like, once you give assets, like each one of these, balconies and like roof structures, etc., like, and users may modify it, and we can specify the rules of modification, like, or the limits of modification, we can say. um, Otherwise it becomes too construction wise infeasible, which is what which in a way, which is what we as designers also did, right? Like, so when we designed these kit of parts, we kind of thought like, okay, how much, what is the process of conversion of raw material into these building units, like how many hours of machine time, how much material is going to cost, etc. So we created this rules for ourselves, like, and so we can publish these rules, and like people can be creative within that, like, for example. So that's another way where we think things can go. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll take few questions from the audience. You
Hmm.
shared a slide about system design,
Hmm.
and based on like the project you show, like I could see a modified role of architects or like a modified project life cycle if we start to integrate these technologies. So,
Hmm.
and with more blockchain and like community based or DAO governance, like how do you foresee the future life cycle of a project?
um yeah, like, I mean, so I think I'll just talk through this video maybe. So life cycle, like, it's interesting to think about life cycle as like from the point of selling a project itself, right? Like, I mean, currently, um, a developer has to develop it, like, and kind of work with experts, and like, and then put it on the market and then try to sell it. And but we can like flip that, like life cycle, like already, if like people can engage with just simple you simplified tools, like, and then say, okay, this is roughly what I want, and then experts can come in and resolve all the conflicts. And so that's how I think like the building's life cycle might start, like that, like in the first instance, what is built is already what users want, or at least closer to what the users want than currently. And so they can consider these aspects, like also how the experience looks like, feels like, because um, in the current situation, like, people cannot really visualize things on 2D plans, and like even however 3D renders you make, like, because you cannot move around, like, people generally find it hard to engage with it. So that's one part of life cycle, is that like what you build is already more likely to be liked by the users, because they've already taken a look and contributed to creating it. So they have skin in the game. um, and then after that, like, the demolition aspect, like, there's increasing technologies, whether dry construction technologies, so that like you can easily dismantle things, and also partially replace buildings, right? Like the interiors, especially, if one user um, leaves the house, like, and sells it to someone else, like, these modules can be replaced to the new family that comes in, like, and so um, So that's something like I foresee life cycle is going to be more multiple use, and parts of the building might always be in constant cycles. And another way to think about life cycles is phased construction, like first you build and occupy parts and the rest or not. Um, so that's another way, like because traditionally, like you would have to build like the building and hope to sell all of it, like and that creates for, I mean, especially in China, there are like enormous numbers of like empty buildings because of this. And so yeah, so there are these aspects of life cycle that can be mitigated and enhanced through this kind of system design thinking, but also more first and foremost engaging the users already from the early point, not after the building is built and when you're trying to sell. Yeah.
Got it. Uh, we have one question
Hmm.
about, will you have access to the data collected on how you respond to the environments? Will this become a way to quantify beauty? And I'm also curious, like, is there a way to quantify the construction feasibility of these assets we develop?
um yeah, there is definitely. So what was the first question? Like quantify beauty?
Uh, yeah. So
Yeah,
how?
yeah, I think,
Mhm.
yeah, that I think yes, like, and that's definitely one of the aspects of the metaverse that is very interesting. As I said, it is a sim to real situation, so it's a simulation, so people are walking around, and you can anonymously anonymize the data, like, and you can see what they're looking at, like what every user is looking at, where their eye is going. And also more explicitly, people can tag comments, and they can like or dislike a certain extension of the building. They can like leave. So yeah, so it is a way to quantify user interaction with the proposed building for sure. And also and learn from it, like, and you can learn from it like in automated ways, but also learn from it by just like engaging with the data, visualizing it, like, and so on, and see and kind of reason with that information. Yeah. And also with this consensus design, because it's a bit like voting. It's a direct democracy, right? Like every person can vote or not vote, and so there's these ideas of quadratic voting, right? Like that, if you really really want like some building to go ahead, like you use all your tokens, um, and then you have to sit out the next round, like, and or if you really don't want something to happen, you can also use all your token, and but then you'll have to sit out the next round until you make some tokens and so on, like. So I think yeah, so there is this aspect of, I wouldn't say quantifying beauty, yeah, which we could do, like to the extent that like we can quantify user preference. But it comes with the caveat that it will always depend on who the users are, and like you'll have to update the machine learned model, and so on. Like, yeah, so there's many things that could be possible. Like you could maybe just store every frame, and then go through a kind of machine learning GAN process. And so yeah, many things are possible, and lots of people are actually doing this already, right? Like they're using games to evaluate like navigation, evaluate like what people see, what, like, where they hang out, um, which is like Instagram live, right? Like many times now architects design things, or designers design things, they put it out on Instagram. Why? Because they want feedback. They want to know what people are liking, and then they will continue designing that. So I think the metaverse is like if it is done right, if there's enough users, and if it is photoreal, and if it is adequately representative of the real thing, then yeah, then it can create a lot of useful information that will improve the chances that what is built is actually something that the users wanted. and not something that they're forced into just occupying.
Hmm.
And what was your second question?
Uh, so one was about like beauty, and uh, I just added on top like
Construction.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, construction feasibility to the extent that yeah, this is where professional created content is, or professional expertise is very important, right? Like, because we as architects and collaborations with structural engineers and so on. Like, for example, even on the Prospera project, like we did do um, uh, from the early point on, like we worked our structural engineers to quantify in the abstract, not in very great detail because that's not possible and not necessary, some kind of construction heuristic, like is it structurally feasible or it's too crazy. So we had rules like, cantilever should not be too more than like 1 pixel wide, and so in a similar way you could, and we also tried to quantify construction feasibility in this way. Like we had an idea of how much material every unit will cost, like by keeping track of how many machine hours are needed, how much material quantities are needed, and so on. So yeah, so we had an idea, and this idea can only be can get further and further refined, which is what we are doing now in stage 3 and 4, or schematic design and construction documentation. We are updating our initial estimates with real information and real costs. And so the next version of the game will have better feasibility metrics.
Hmm. Uh,
So yeah, you start with the hypothesis and update it. Yeah.
got it. There is a question from Matt. How can the metaverse and blockchain help the architectural community deal with sustainability issues we can address as part of climate change?
Um, yeah, that's a good point. Like, maybe a good way to think about. Actually, let's address like some of the criticisms of this, right? Like both metaverse um, um, and and blockchains. Like metaverse criticism is that it's like a dystopian nightmare. Like it's just video games and video game addiction and all kinds of things. Like so, those are, some of it is valid, some of it is like just like people complaining. So yeah, we need to think about that. And also blockchain side, like there's definitely concerns about like energy consumption of like proof of work consensus mechanisms. There's concerns about financial scams. Like there's concerns that like the art that is produced is like not top quality, um, and so our answer to all of this is like, yeah, this is definitely something that we should be considering, and we should not dismiss it. Like also, like, um, we shouldn't end up in like this kind of fire festival type of situation where like it's entirely fraudulent, and or even avoid that public perception that it could end up there. So how to avoid it is exactly to address real concerns of head on. And we say, we are definitely focused on the long arc of value creation. We're not interested in like just making a quick buck. We're not interested in cash grab. We're not interested in, um, as we have been interested in this idea for a long time, 20 plus years, and so we will continue to be interested. And that is one way to mitigate some of these concerns. Like we are in it for the long term, and also we can continue, we can use it for socially good and important causes. Like one cause is like just technology development. Like a lot of interesting technology was developed ahead of its time, like vrml ideas, second life ideas. Like just because it didn't work 10 years ago doesn't mean it's invalid technology, and now might be the time to for some of these early attempts to like really be rebooted and see. um, and um, and the other way to think about it is also, look at like other positive examples, like the way Minecraft is used by many communities in rehabilitating earth after earthquake, or some rehabilitation, or like even urban renewal projects that use Minecraft, engage the community, and so on. So there are these positive examples on the social sustainability side, which I think is important, which is also an important thing to look at, like, and learn from, and um, and kind of generally think of the metaverse as a sandbox, as a home for computation, and how can we uh, educate and use these technologies to for sustainable development? Well, by democratizing good content. There are 3 billion gamers that are growing up on Roblox and Minecraft and Fortnite and any other game, Axie Infinity, play to earn games, like, and they're gonna. And what's interesting is games are very low threshold entry points for more serious applications, whether it is ecological concerns or social or experience concern. How to create good design is is can only be improved by like making sure more people are experimenting with it rather than less, right? So that's our. So if the more people are engaging with these issues of ecological or sustainable responsible design, more people are engaging with issues of spatially interesting, engaging design, like um, then like the likelihood that there are positive changes in the real world is significantly more, because if you're growing up on your mobile phone, like, you will expect the real world to be somewhat like your game, and so it's educational, and games are engaging. So we are just saying, like, put the right designs in front of these kids, in front of this extraordinarily enthusiastic community. So rather than learn from like the cities like Atlanta, why don't we learn from cities like Barcelona, and make those tools available, make those spatially engaging, ecologically responsible designs that professionals are creating? Why don't we make those available to the gamers? Like, I mean, 3 billion gamers is half of the planet almost. And yeah, so the amount of experimentation that we could be doing is phenomenal, and our attempt is to try and um, make available, like, what we are professionally discovering, and put it out there, in the metaverse and gaming space, so that um, people make of it what, surely some good solutions will come out of it. Yeah.
Mhm. And we saw examples how online or virtual technologies will affect the physical realization.
Mhm.
How do you foresee like the physical digital interaction bidirectional? Like, what are some interfaces or physical digital devices you foresee to be integrated?
Um, well, I mean, yeah. So there's synchronization aspects, right? That I mean, so some of these are mixed reality technologies already. Like, I saw somebody tweeting about, like, in CES, there's technologies where real time they will update the location of users in the virtual model. Like, so, so that's kind of useful. Like, and that and in Southeast Asia, China, Seoul, etc., this is already happening. Like, your mobile phone is updating its location, and so, like, when you point it at a certain building, like, you get new information, right? Like, so this kind of thing is gonna happen more and more. Like, but what can we as architects do with that? Like, we obviously cannot develop the those technologies. And if we do, like, then we are not no longer architects. We just change their career, which is fine. Like, but um, so how can we design better, like knowing that these technologies are coming? So IoT or sensor technologies or synchronization technologies between the virtual and the real. The idea of digital twin extended to also people. Like, I think uh, to me that is the most interesting bit. Like, to know what people are doing is information that we as architects should be very much concerned with. Of course, to know what the building is doing is something that engineers should be concerned with more, like, heating systems, like, and cooling systems, and all of these things. Um, but we should definitely be concerned if we notice that, like, people are getting lost, and if we notice that people are getting stuck, like people are like not always gathering in some areas and most of the building is empty. Like, these are things that we as architects should really be concerned about and focus on. And any technology that gives us information about how users are behaving in the real world, and how we can update our virtual models and hypotheses on that basis, is something that, like, would definitely be interesting for me. Like, for example, even with this micro factory, which we didn't talk about much, but so we are building a factory on the island, where we are just importing the robots, and uh, we're not bringing like pre-manufactured parts. We are going to manufacture the parts on the island, thereby upskilling local labor and also reducing transportation costs, etc. And um, what we want to learn there is update our initial hypothesis of the construction costs, construction complexities, and so on. So here we are working with like a company called Circular Factory, which is setting up the factory and micro factory and training up the local labor, etc. And we want to update our kind of 3D models and the information, the meta information in them, with how much time does it take to mill, how much time does it take to finish the product, how much time does it take, how much material was wasted, and all of these things per element, per every element that goes into the house. So that's another feedback that we want to establish, like, between the material side and then also a feedback between the people side, like, so how people are using the space. So soon the next phase for the configurator, for example, is we're gonna put it autonomously online, and anybody can log in. And so we will try and keep track of where people are going, what they're clicking, and so to improve the service. And of course, it will be GDPR compliant, and like we won't collect anybody's information other than to improve what we offer them. Yeah.
I see.
So
Uh,
people and matter, feedback between people and the digital model, and people with feedback between physical material and processes and the digital model.
God. Yeah, and I think there are like definitely I could foresee opportunities of like uh life cycle building upgradation where like based on the data you could update. There's a one question from Manish about the business, like, so how would you foresee like clients understanding toward blockchain and metaverse? Do you foresee like new metaverse client or existing clients being educated towards it?
Yeah, I think, like, if we focus on, again, on long-term value creation, like, you know, I read somewhere once, you cannot sell how clever your technology is. You can only sell the benefits to the user. So what we try to think about is, like, what problems do these technologies solve? And if it genuinely solves a user's problem, in which, in this case, the user might be the end user or the developer. And and if we solve a problem for the end user, the developer is not obviously going to be interested, right? Like, why? Because ultimately he wants or they want to sell the buildings or the architecture to the end users, right? Like either through subscription or through rent or through selling it and so on. So if we solve genuine problems for the end user, then for sure there will be more clients, new clients or existing clients who will want to use the metaverse. So we see both, like we see new clients, like new generation of gamers and people growing up on these, like will expect like new kinds of services from architects. um, because you can imagine if already, like I can look at my son, like who's 4 or 5 years old, um, getting used to your phone and like and then you start touching things on the wall and like you get frustrated that like things are not updating, right? Like and so yeah, so there'll be new generation of users whose problems and for whom we should offer value, right? Like so true use value creation, and so that's why we made this kind of table, like what are the problems that um, that uh, that these technologies need to solve for the users on land and online. So main problem you want to solve is user engagement. Like you want that like their experience is fulfilling, their experience is interesting, exciting, and that they can interact with their friends, interact with like get their job done, right? Like like it's not just some going, it's not entertainment, it is truly something that will enable them to do their everyday work. And so for example here we designed this congress space for the micronation of Liberland with the intention that like it will be the public square. It will be, people can actually start seeing how the city works, or and they can voice their concerns. So it's not just entertainment, go see a movie, but like and fly around in virtual space, because that will quickly get boring. Like so, and we also want therefore to be compatible with mobile phone use. So it's it's not that you need to have the download this like Unreal game and like spend have a beefy computer. So we're looking at pixel streaming, we're looking at mobile phone compatibility, precisely for this reason, that we actually want this to be productive part of people's lives. And if that is the case, like yeah, we will have both existing clients of buildings that will want to have an online version, and they might be clients who only want the online version until they raise enough money to make the physical thing work out. Um, yeah, so I think so there may be many kinds of new clients in the business sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I just had a thought. Maybe like this could become like a minimal viable prototype or product until they get the whole community interested or like do crowdfunding or developer fundraising.
Yeah, no, definitely, and the minimal viable product like is involves a lot of storytelling, right? That is why architecture is so interesting. It's like movies, like we should think about like crowdsource movies and so on, and crowdsource comics. How do these things like Netflix try? I think it was Bandersnatch or something. Yeah, um, it was an interesting experiment. Like, how do you crowdsource uh, ideas, and then you have professionals who work with those ideas and convert it into an interesting new cultural output, right? Like you cannot just take crowdsource ideas and like make a mashup, like at least in phase one, like initially you would need the experts to kind of finesse it out, and over time maybe there will be a sub community of not entirely novice users but like kind of pro users that may bridge the gap, etc.
Yeah. And what is your piece of advice for students or professional or even like architecture firms to be technically prepared for this blockchain and metaverse?
Well, as I said, like discard like beam based thinking. I think like we should like really think about. So one is like discard beam based thinking. Think about like the other strand, like which is compatible with like user experience, compatible with like the metaverse production pipeline. It's compatible with game technologies. It's compatible with robotic manufacturing, and so and the second thing to prepare for is think of architecture as something in the service of the user and of user experiences. Think of narrative, think about dramaturgy, and less about like engineered product, like which is what the 20th century tried and failed miserably, right? Like that's the Atlanta model. Like we want to think about Barcelona, we want to think about cities that are pedestrian friendly, we want to think about Jane Jacobs, and those ideas of high density, high interaction rich, information rich spaces. So how do you prepare for this? Like, yeah, you need to refocus, realign your motivations. Like you think about who your clients are. Your clients are the end users of your spaces, and and the technology choices will automatically come. Like, so the reason we chose Maya and like the mesh processing pipeline is not because like we made a detailed analysis, like because we know that like architecture is about the user, and any tools that allows us to put on the hat of the user is what we're going to use. Like, so that's why we use Maya, we use like Unreal, we use very much attracted. So we take those user representations and then add to that our structural concerns and our material concerns, rather than the other way around. You know,
Yeah.
rather than start with BIM and then add the game bit. Yeah.
Hmm. And there are few questions in the chat about like policy that would support and foster this development, and also what do you see could be the major friction in taking this to the next level?
I think friction is yeah, like it's like a lot of misconceptions. I mean, some are genuine concerns, right? Like concerns that like there is video game addiction, concerns that there is a monopoly, the like Facebook or like whatever. I mean, yeah, there is some amount of genuine concern, so that's friction. But there's also a lot of noise, right? Like there's, and we shouldn't like kill off experimentation early on. Like we should just let it be, and find sandboxes to do experimentation. And as long as we are interested in long-term value creation, I believe like that will continue. And already there's like extraordinary interest, global interest. Is not just like one country or one city. Like people are discovering all kinds of use cases of these technologies. So as long as we are cognizant of the critiques, the genuine critiques, not like the noise, not like people just crying foul about everything. Um, then and as long as we are cognizant of that, as long as like we are genuinely focused on long-term value creation, and and how do we democratize engaging, meaning interesting, spatially new, information rich, interaction rich architecture, which is also sustainably created or could be created sustainably physically. I think it will automatically be accelerated. Once we focus on the user and providing use value, like rather than thinking about like cool technology, like if we think about what problems and what new things we can offer the users, if we put the user's hat on, like I think a lot of the frictions can be uh, overcome, and also this can be truly accelerated. But
Hmm.
there's yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
I can take another two questions and then I need to go.
yeah, I was about to like wrap up the whole thing. So
Mhm.
I have like few rapid fire questions to finish the interview. So you'll have like 5 to 10 seconds to answer it, and you got to make
Hmm.
it like super brief.
Okay.
So let's do this. So, which city is in your travel bucket list?
Which city is in my travel bucket list?
Mhm.
St. Petersburg.
Which technical or non-technical book made a big impact in your life?
I would say article, and that was Walter Benjamin, author as producer.
Your role model?
I am an average of the few key role models that like already follow. Of course, my both my parents and also Patrick and Philip Block, who is my PhD advisor, Patrick Schumacher, who's a mentor, and also Theo, who's the director of DRL, and my close colleagues in code, the computation and design group in Zaha.
Yeah. Your favorite movie?
Pulp Fiction.
That's a good one. If you had unlimited time and resources, what would you do first?
Um, yeah, well, I think like I would continue doing what I'm doing with which is engage in like combine, yeah, aspire to be a polymath, like, so like, I would spend all my time like acquiring information and talking to people, and trying to do things in the real world. Yeah.
Your hobbies?
Yeah, computer programming, reading, and yeah, I would say those two for now.
All right. And lastly, anything which we didn't cover in this interview and you'd like to share?
No, I think everything was covered. Like the main message is, I think, to think of long-term value and think of like the real synergy between metaverse and real life cities, uh, s- thinking of architecture as cultural production, thinking of architects as creators of scenes, as of dramaturgy, of environments, and rather than of like physical matter, right? That we are user experience creators and environment creators.
Yeah. All right. Thanks a lot, Shajay, for this amazing presentation, sharing your thoughts. Your work is truly inspiring, and I will look forward what you develop. And I also would like to thank all the audience for their questions and their engagement till the end. And have a nice rest of your day. Thanks for sharing your
Yeah,
work.
yeah. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Mayur. Thanks for the opportunity. It was a great conversation.